Let's turn back now to our top story, the triple threat facing this country's vaccination rollout. First, Pfizer slashed the number of doses in its shipments to Canada for several weeks. Then Moderna announced it also has to cut back thousands of doses in expected deliveries this month. Now the European Union has given itself the power to block or limit vaccine exports to other countries. The federal government insists it does have reassurances from the EU that our procurement plan won't be affected. So why is Canada not on the official list of countries that are exempt from the new trade controls? Rachel Bendayan is the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of International Trade. Tracy Gray is the Conservative Party's trade critic. And Daniel Blakey is the NDP's trade critic. They all join me now. Hi, nice to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Glad to be here.
Great to see you.
Ms. Bendayan, I'll start with you. I know the Prime Minister has spoken of assurances from politicians in the EU that Canada won't be affected by these export controls, but why don't we have that in writing?
Listen, Vashi, the Prime Minister spoke with the President of the European Commission and has his word that these measures are not going to affect Canadian shipments of vaccines. And our minister, the Minister of International Trade, has the assurances from the Vice President of the European Commission. We know that when two leaders speak, there is a commitment there. And, certainly we are continuing to have conversations. The minister spoke just earlier this afternoon to her Spanish counterpart, yesterday with her Belgian counterpart, and I am reassured by all of our European counterparts that our shipments are coming to Canada.
Did the federal government, did any of the people you referred to there who had those conversations explicitly ask to be assured in writing, to get something in writing?
Of course, we've asked for every assurance possible, and we've received strong assurances that we are going to receive our shipments. This is a situation that we knew was going to be very difficult. There's extraordinary international competition out there for vaccines. Every country is looking to secure vaccines for their population, just as Canada is. And at every opportunity that we get, our officials, our ministers, and each and every single one of our members of parliament that represent Canadians are pushing for vaccines for our people.
Before I move on to your colleagues, just one last follow-up. Can you understand why it would make Canadians a bit nervous that we're just relying on the word of politicians in the EU rather than something in writing, given that 92 countries are on a list of exemptions?
Of course, I understand that Canadians are worried. Canadians are worried about getting sick. Canadians are worried about getting vaccines. Canadians are worried about young people having mental health issues. I am worried. I lay awake at night, every night for the past year, worried about the 100,000 people that I represent in my riding. And I'm sure that's the same for all parliamentarians, regardless of party. This is a time where we need to come together to work our hardest in order to make sure that we work with our allies. I mean, this is not the first time that we're speaking to the European Union. The European Union is a long-standing ally of Canada, and we've been working with them to secure agreements and trade deals over the course of the last many years. We secured a trade deal with the European Union even before the United States did. This is our ally, this is our partner, and our partner is assuring us that our contracts will be respected and we will receive our vaccines.
Ms. Gray, as far as the exemption list goes, there are three other countries not included, the US, the UK, and Australia. Is it not possible that the verbal assurances are enough in this case?
Well, thank you. And first, I just want to say that when this announcement came out last week, that over the weekend, it was Conservative members on the International Trade Committee that asked for an emergency meeting. And thankfully, all members of the committee agreed to that. And we had the committee meeting today. And a big part of that was to find out why Canada wasn't on that exemption list. What does that mean? Can we get on the list? How will that be different than countries that are on the list? And, with your question regarding who's not on the list, those other countries do have production capabilities within their countries and they've ramped up. So we are different in that way. And so it's really important for us to know what it means by us not being on that list.
What reason do you have, though, Ms. Gray, to disbelieve that the assurances are made in good faith?
Well, we don't have anything documented. We don't have anything that is some kind of a commitment. We also know as well that individual countries can also block potentially their exports. And so there's a whole process that has been laid out which could be either with the EU, an individual country or then companies themselves. So there's this whole process that's been laid out that potentially our vaccine supplies could have to go through. And because we're not on the list, that doesn't give us real assurances.
Mr. Blakey, the measures that have been put in place by the EU do have a call for companies to respect advance purchasing agreements like the ones that were made with Canada. Is that not added assurance as well?
Look, I mean, I think we all hope that these assurances are going to prove true. I think the difference is you've got some countries that are on a list that are exempt from these measures, and Canada's not on the list. And the fact of the matter is that unlike some of the other countries who didn't make the list, we don't have domestic vaccine production. So that matters. That's a big deal. And what we get, you just heard it from the parliamentary secretary again, but we've heard it in other forums, is it's kind of, well, you know, we signed a free trade agreement with them, so how could they ever do this to us? I mean, we just lived through steel and aluminum tariffs with the United States. We've got the ongoing softwood lumber dispute. We know that free trade agreements aren't enough, but Canada is unique in having governments of different stripes that for over 30 years have placed such a blind faith in the idea of globalized trade that they haven't been looking after important priorities at home with industrial planning and ensuring that when it comes to some vital aspects of the economy, and in this case, public health for vaccine production, that Canada actually has the means to look after its own. And that's where Canada stands out among our allies, is not having done the homework at home in addition to trying to grow global supply chains and increase international trade.
Yeah, and I know your party's suggestion has been to make public the vaccine manufacturing process here in Canada. My question to you, though, is how that will address the immediate concerns, for example, where exports are concerned.
Well, look, obviously that's not a substitute for continuing to apply pressure to the European Union. And I think but we need to get going on this. And had we gotten going on this early in the pandemic, I think we could have made more progress than we have to date. But instead, we've seen a government that's concerned, like, for instance, at the WTO, where there are a number of countries who are calling for waivers on intellectual property in order to facilitate domestic vaccine production. Canada has been reticent in order to get on board with that. Anywhere, and even here, I mean, here you have an example of the government. We saw reports early in January. They were going to companies saying, we're willing to pay a premium for faster, larger deliveries. It's partly that kind of thing that has created the problem in the EU, because we have a government who thinks about going to big corporations first instead of how you regulate in the public interest first. And that's not what our European partners are doing. It's not what our allies who have domestic vaccine production have done over the last 30 years since Canada sold off its public vaccine production capacity. And our government needs to get with the program and realize that not all of our trading partners are as invested in this kind of ideological approach. They're covering their bets by ensuring that they can do what needs to be done domestically at the same time.
Okay, I just have time for a quick comment from each of you. And on the note around corporations, Ms. Bendayan, there's been a lot of questions. There have been many questions directed to your government about what exactly can happen, for example, if one of these companies doesn't uphold its end of the bargain and something happens with the exports. Will your government be making these contracts more transparent? Will you be making them public?
Listen, Vashi, we are in very unusual circumstances right now. Disclosure of information inside of our contracts, and I'm speaking here both as a parliamentarian and as a former lawyer, could be extremely dangerous. It could be extremely dangerous for
There are other
supply chains.
countries like the U.S. and Brazil who are doing it.
Could be compromising the arrival of vaccines into this country, and our number one objective is to get vaccines to Canadians. So we will continue to do everything that we need to do in order to make sure that the vaccines arrive in Canada. And yes, that does mean that we cannot disclose all of the sensitive information inside of our contracts. I'm going to be very frank.
Can some of it be disclosed? Because very little of it right now is.
Certainly, the parts that have been disclosed are the parts that we can disclose without compromising the arrival of vaccines, without compromising our supply chains. And if I may pick up on something that my colleague, Ms. Gray, mentioned, we did have the minister at committee today. And during testimony before committee, one of the Conservative members suggested that we threaten the European Union with pulling out of NATO. I mean, this kind of irresponsible rhetoric has no place in Canada. It's something that we've heard from politicians in other places, but certainly has no place in Canada. And I'd like to know if that's the Conservatives' official position.
Is that your official position, Ms. Gray, or do you denounce the call to remove ourselves from NATO and as a response to what the EU is doing?
Well, that question from that member is being taken quite out of context, and that's unfortunate.
Can you provide the context?
What I will say, it was a question just saying what are the different what are the different options that we have, and it was a question. It certainly wasn't a statement or a recommendation. But going back to looking at the different contracts that we have, I mean, we have no information. The public doesn't have any information on what are in the contracts, when we will be receiving various vaccines on a weekly basis in order to give certainty to people. And really, this sort of protectionism that's happening right now shouldn't be a surprise, because really early on in the pandemic, there was some of this that we saw with PPE and with ventilators. So as we were negotiating these different contracts and looking at what countries were making them, these are some considerations that should have been taken place, because it was happening earlier on with other supplies.
Okay, Mr. Blakey, I just have time for a quick final comment to you on the subject of making things more transparent. The government and Ms. Van Duyn, as you heard, has maintained that could undermine our negotiating position, and some of it is commercially sensitive. Your response to that?
Well, look, I think the government does need to be more transparent. I'll just give you an example. I mean, look, I think we all understand there may well be some sensitive information in those contracts. Today, I asked the minister, did you ask the European Union to be on the list of exempt countries? And we couldn't get an answer to that. I asked, did you get an explanation for why Canada is not on that list? We didn't get an explanation for that. So surely those are questions that ought to be able to be answered. Those aren't legal questions. Those are questions about our government doing its due diligence to protect the interests of Canadians. And the fact that we can't get a straight answer to that question is indicative of the lack of transparency and accountability that we're dealing with when it comes to our own government on this important question. Okay,
I have to leave it there. I'm out of time tonight. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your time this evening. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Rachel Van Duyn, Tracy Gray, and Daniel Blakey. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.